Well, they've gone farther than that. We've allowed them to go farther than that. Now they're trying to impede inside of our bodies. So this is the last line of our defense, and we need to stand up and say, hey, look, I am not going to comply just because my government says I need to put something in my body. So for the principle of that's why I just got woken up. I was like, okay, if we let them take this, like, they have it all.
Welcome back to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. I am Stephanie Weidel. Please like, comment, subscribe to, and share our podcasts. We want to get this information out to a wide audience. There has been a great deal of illegal activity within our government, just swept under the rug in front of our very eyes. It can no longer be overlooked. Unless we want the past 3 years or worse things to happen again, we must face the facts, be bold enough to speak about it, and plead for change from the average American citizens around us, as well as demand change from leaders themselves. Sharing these podcasts with those around you is a good way to start.
Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Today, I am joined by Briana Céspedes, former Air Force broadcast journalist. She is an involuntary veteran who speaks about her experience being put in quarantine for over 140 days, being reprimanded for not following what they maintained was a lawful order, and ultimately receiving a general discharge. Through her organization, Involuntary Veterans, she seeks to bring awareness to the truth that this can happen again, as accountability has not been achieved yet. Briana seeks to support others who were involuntarily pushed out of the military service by forming legislation that will reform our broken bureaucracy. Welcome, Briana. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Would you tell us a little bit about your history and also how you came to enter the Air Force?
Yeah, so I'm a Cuban Mexican American, and I grew up in California in the rancheros out here. I have 5 sisters. I was homeschooled all the way through. Even I did university online. And I'm just a lover of the Constitution. First of all, lover of the Lord Jesus. And second of all, lover of the Constitution. I want to defend it. I love it. My family, we came from Cuba, so we know what it's like when we lose the principles that this nation has stood. So it just stood on, right? Those principles of freedom and fighting against socialism and communism, because when the government has control and when they come in, we're at a loss. So the freedoms that we give up, we can't have back. And I really went into the military believing that and wanting to defend that. So I joined when I was 17, almost 18, and I did the Air Force. I chose the Air Force because my dad told me I couldn't join the Marines. That was not an option. That's what he said. So I was like, all right, fine, Dad. Because he had 5 daughters that were homeschooled. I get it, So decided to join the Air Force and actually got a broadcast journalist slot and was doing journalism and videography as well as radio broadcasting. So I got to do the whole Good Morning Vietnam, where you were actually announcing on the radio and doing announcements. And my name was DJ Cubanita. It was a great time. I was ranking up. I was supposed to put on E5 in 2021 when the COVID mandate came out, right? So I was excelling in my career. Stars and Stripes recognized me as best DJ personality. And I was finally getting up in the ranks and really considering, wow, this could be a great career. And I could go to Europe after this and have a great slot. So I extended to stay in the Air Force rather than finishing at 4 years. I wanted to do 6 so I could go to Europe. And that's when the whole crazy thing happened. And I'm sure we're going to get way more into that. But that's like a really short summary of why I got in and who I am.
What drew you into journalism in the first place?
originally I was like, I want to be spec ops, Marines, like do military all the way, right? And then as I was getting to learn about the military with my recruiter, I learned that you could actually have a profession. And I wanted to have some tangible skill that I could take afterwards. And journalism, I think, was a great arena. I'm passionate about getting truth out and sharing information. So just decided to try it, to be honest. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just trying to get into a good field. And they liked my voice enough to where they put me in as a broadcast journalist.
You do have a great radio voice.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful. So March of 2020 came along. What did you start seeing within the Air Force at that time? Or even before that? February, January?
It was 2020, right? The beginning of 2020. I was stationed in Jersey when everything started, right? And I was over at the Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst. At first, it was kind of like, all right, it's something far away and it's not a really big deal. They made us go home and work, which was honestly kind of cool in the beginning because we didn't have to go get up early. We didn't have to dress in uniform. I could just do my work from home, and it was awesome. And I even got sent out to New York. We were, with the National Guard, we were sent out with them on like a TDY, and we were supposed to help.
TDY is?
It is a temporary, that acronym, I never asked what it actually was. It's like a temporary, I don't know. TDY, it's essentially, it's not a deployment, but you're getting sent out somewhere for a short period of time. I'm sorry about my ignorance on that one. But yeah, we were TDY'd over to New York, and we were sent to the hospitals to document all of the information that was going on, the COVID National Guard deployments, and how we were supposed to broadcast everything and also keep it for historical footage. So ended up doing that, which was supposed to be a very risky type thing because we were being exposed, right? I never got COVID until later, 2020, 2021. So I was in the hospitals, and then we got sent back and we would work at home. It was just conflicting information was going back and forth. When I was at home, right, you couldn't leave. You had to wear a mask all the time. Just how it was. And then we would get sent to the hospitals where everyone had COVID, and we'd be exposed to all of them. So anyway.
What did you see in the hospitals?
A lot of it was people were freaking out. It was the beginning. So the hospitals were getting full. There was a lot of, okay, what remedies do we use? Everyone was scared of everyone. We were all standing far apart from one another. It was busy. For sure, there was a feeling of this is new and we don't know how to handle it. And I think overall, our health system, where we are at and where we weren't prepared for what came our way. And a lot of it was just being overwhelmed within the hospitals specifically.
When did you first see or hear of any talk of vaccine mandates?
So the vaccine mandate, I remember in the beginning, right, we were just quarantining a lot, but it wasn't too bad. Everybody was doing it. And then you could go into work. It was pretty chill. I got sent to Korea, and that's when the vaccine mandate eventually rolled out. But I remember I was in Korea, and I remember President Biden saying, I will not enforce a federal vaccine mandate. I remember him saying that early on. And I was like, okay, great. I'm not going to have to worry about whatever this thing is, because I was just hearing some information, but I wasn't following along too detailed. And then it was in September 2021 that Secretary of Defense put out the memo, and he said, hey, we are not going to require a non-FDA approved vaccine. However, you have to get this vaccine. right? So it was a contradictory memo, which was essentially saying, we need you to get this vaccine, but it's not FDA approved, and we can't legally make you get an FDA emergency authorized product, right? So it was it was countering information from the get-go. When Secretary of Defense Austin, when he put out that memo, all of the branches started to act, and the Air Force was one of the first ones to really start enforcing really hard. And that was back in September 2021, when they, in my command, they pushed and pushed and pushed us, hey, get the vaccine, get the vaccine. And I was still like, okay, well, Secretary of Defense said we don't have to get this emergency product. He can't legally enforce us to do that. However, you're telling me I have to get this, otherwise I'm going to get kicked out. Like, why is that happening? So information was strange, and I was just trying to wait for as long as possible. And it wasn't until I got an email from my MAGCOM commander. So that's the major command. He's all the way up there. I never talk to him. He doesn't talk to me. I'm only an E4 at this point, right? He emails me directly without any supervisor CC'd at all involved, which does not follow the chain of command that we're supposed to have within the military. And he says, if you do not get this vaccine, you are disobeying a lawful order, potential court-martial, dishonorable discharge, just all that, right? The threats. And I got scared. And then just a little bit after that fear, which I considered for a second, oh, should I just get this vaccine? After that, I knew that this was so illogical and fear-based that I could not comply. It was a product that went against my own convictions to put inside my body. And then the tactics in which they use to enforce it, those things can't stand. Fear can't stand. So that's why I was really like, I cannot participate in this.
So going back a little bit, what made you first question the given narrative? Because everyone had that awakening moment to what was going on. When did you reach that moment?
It was that moment, the fear moment. It was definitely that. I would say that is like the cornerstone of why I decided not to get it. It was for the sake of principle, honestly. The product, I get, science was not my best subject in high school, and I get a little lost with all of the stats and all those things. So I didn't do it so much. The product I didn't feel comfortable putting in my body. I'd like to not risk whatever the risks that were involved. I was like, I can't do that. The product that they had inside of it, the aborted fetal tissue, all of that was an issue for me. But more than that, I cared about the principle behind this vaccine. And that principle goes back to the Constitution, which when we join the military, in fact, every citizen also, I attended when they come and they join to become a citizen of the United States, the immigration, what is it called? The immigration, I forget what it's called. But that ceremony, right? The ceremony, when they come, they're also swearing to defend the Constitution. So every single citizen, whether you immigrate in or you're born, you are automatically swearing to defend the Constitution and to abide by its laws. So all of us are supposed to hold to those principles. And one of the biggest ones is to defend those basic freedoms. Like Commander Rob Green, he wrote in his book, Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines, right? He said that this is our last line of defense. I mean, back when they were having the revolution, the American Revolution, their line of defense was their homes. If the government was coming and impeding in their homes, they said, no, we're going to fight. Well, they've gone farther than that. We've allowed them to go farther than that. Now they're trying to impede inside of our bodies. So this is the last line of our defense, and we need to stand up and say, hey, look, I am not going to comply just because my government says I need to put something in my body. So for the principle of that's why I just got woken up. I was like, okay, if we let them take this, like they have it all.
Those are very powerful words. You said that you were homeschooled.
Yes.
What did your parents teach in your homeschool that made you be a critical thinker?
Yeah, I think homeschooling is a wonderful method of schooling, depending on the child. I think that certain children do well in a classroom, but most don't, because the classroom has to accommodate for the lowest common denominator in the school. Like the kid that doesn't get it, the whole class has to slow down for that kid. And homeschooling is great because it's independently based. So you're always learning based on the skill level and the way that you learn, whether we write, whether we hear, whether we work with our hands. Homeschooling is great because it can modify to the way that you learn. And my parents, the reason they started homeschooling us was simply because they wanted us to be instructed in the Word of God. They wanted us to know the principles that are in the scripture. They wanted us to fall in love with God and to not be told that the earth was created from billions and billions of years without a creator, and to not be influenced also by the humanism that's being told in our schools. So we learned first for that reason. And then it became something where I think my mom just realized, wow, my children actually are learning better. They're learning faster, and they're able to, they're really smart. If you let a kid be smart, they can be very, very smart. Just don't diminish them and don't downplay the abilities that they have. So we ended up graduating because of my mom's program. Like all of us ended up graduating high school before we were 13. I graduated university when I was 15, got into law school when I was 16. So just that can happen for kids. It's possible. And it's dependent on how you are raised and how you think through, and also how much your parents believe in you. And I think our parents really believed in us. I'm really thankful for that.
Wow. So getting back to the vaccines. So you got this email from your head. So they had kind of broken the chain of command and they went right to you saying, you must get this. How did you respond?
So again, in the beginning, I responded with a lot of like fear because he's the highest guy. And I freaked out for sure. I was an E4, didn't know that they could do that, which they really couldn't policy wise. And then I reacted, and then I had that conviction, right? But what I did was just a formal email back, ceasing my supervisor, putting it back within the chain of command like it was supposed to be, and saying, okay, I'm going to submit a religious exemption. And that's where I got to talking to the chaplain and starting the whole process, which was a long process. They ask a lot of information. And then based on if the chaplain believes, if you have sincere beliefs, then you can go forward and do the whole submission process for the religious exemption.
And how did that end up?
So it wasn't until 168 days later, which is another policy issue. One thing I focus on in involuntary veterans is, yes, they kicked us out. Yes, it was unlawful. But all the things that happened on the in-between before they kicked us out, there were a lot of illegal things. There was a lot of coercion. There was a lot of wrong being done. So those policies that were broken, I also talk about. And one of those policies that was broken was AFI 52201, which talks about the religious exemption process and making sure that our accommodation requests are responded to within a certain timeline. And they did not follow that. I actually talked to my own congressman and mentioned it to him, and he said, I'll talk to the Secretary of the Air Force. I never got a response back because only Congress can waive that. But the Air Force was just saying, well, we're backlogged. I'm sorry. It's like, well, your policy says you have to do this. So what's the missing piece here? So it was a long time that I waited. And in between that time, I could tell you all sorts of stuff that happened. The endless quarantines, the endless threats, the endless isolation.
Let's go there. So how are you treated as an unvaccinated Air Force?
Airman.
Airman! Yeah. What a great name! An air woman.
Yes, air woman. Yeah. So when I submitted the exemption, I thought, okay, I'll just be on like a holding and things will be okay. Like they can't discriminate against me for my religious convictions, right? Well, I was wrong. I was the only one, right? In my office, I was the only one on the base that I knew about. I'm sure there were others, but I was the only one at that time that was submitting and trying to just say, hey, look, I can't get this. So there was pressure on all sides. My supervisor, my office, my commander, my peers, the people, my first shirt. And the first shirt is someone that is he's supposed to help you with the environment. He's supposed to help your mental health. He's supposed to make sure that it's a healthy environment in the unit. And he told me, I can't help you until you get vaccinated. So things like this, where I was seen as kind of the leper on the outside when I was stationed in Belgium. Because of all that time waiting, I was still waiting and I got transferred over to Belgium. When I was in Belgium, my master sergeant was very, very hard on me. She made me isolate away from the rest of my coworkers. I had the only one with the mask.
Where were you when the mandate? So you were in Korea when the mandates first came down. And
yes.
Then where were you sent?
I got sent to Belgium because I extended for that slot. And it was actually a mistake because I wasn't supposed to be able to move. I wasn't supposed to be able to transport, PCS they call it, which is a permanent change of station. I know that acronym. That I wasn't supposed to be allowed to do that because I wasn't green on my vaccine status, right? But there was a mistake in the system, which happens a lot, and I got sent over to Belgium. So in Korea, though, I need you to know, after I had submitted the exemption request, I spent, in total, between Korea and Belgium, and a little bit before as well, I spent over 140 days in quarantine. And I counted those up, right? Those are added up 2 weeks at a time. Some were back to back, especially in Belgium. But the amount of time that I spent in a dorm, in the Air Force, we call it dorm, but it's actually barracks. In that barracks room, they put us in there. There were distinguished barracks for COVID barracks. They called it COVID barracks. And these people would have like the suits, the chemical suits. It would be tapered off with caution tape. And you were like being sent to the brig. It was a terrible place to go. You had your laptop and you were there for 14 days at a time. If you got lucky and you didn't get another back to back, it was like honestly third world sci-fi kind of stuff. It was
So why
crazy.
Were you sent? Were they saying you were exposed to somebody?
So I would get sent. There were so many reasons why I would get sent. And eventually I was
let me tag on to that. Were vaccinated people treated the same way?
So I was getting put into quarantine way more than my peers. Vaccinated members, sometimes they would have like, okay, you'll be in quarantine for 7 days versus 14. If you're unvaccinated, you do the full 14. If you're vaccinated, you do 7. Sometimes it would be that way. Or sometimes it would just be like in my office specifically, I was being sent back to back. In Belgium, I spent at least 2 months where I was in quarantine. I did not show up to work. And that was because my master sergeant found ways to put me there. And of course, I can't prove it necessarily. I can't say that she tried. I believe she wanted my best, but at the same time, I think she did not like me because I did not have that vaccine. You know, she was scared of me. She would constantly stay 6 feet away from me, always wear a mask. And it just, the whole time I felt very like, okay, I'm the leper on the outside. stay out there. You're sent to quarantine for everything from let's say you were in the grocery store and someone got reported a week later that they had COVID, you get sent. Let's say someone in your unit went to a gathering and one of their friends happened to have COVID that coughed on one person that went to another. And so you get sent, your whole unit gets sent, right, to quarantine. I remember going to the doctor's office and I just went for a regular checkup. And then they said, hey, you need to stay. You're going to be sent to quarantine. I'm like, I'm not sick. Like, I'm fine. What are you talking about? Just for everything and anything, we were sent to quarantine. And when I say quarantine, it's not just like in your house and you have everything. I'm saying being sent to an empty room, 4 white walls, and you are being put in there 14 days. And it's back to back where I was experiencing this. It was making me go mental. It was crazy.
How did you respond? What did you say? Did you try to reason with them? Did you try to leave?
I tried a lot of things. In the beginning, I just complied and I just said, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna it's better than working because the work environment was really tense too. So I was like, okay, whatever. And then after the 5th, 6th, 7th time being sent to quarantine, I'm like, hey, this is ridiculous. You cannot send me here again. Like I would have nightmares about being held in a cell because that's what it was like. And I remember talking to my master sergeant and literally crying on the phone with her and saying, ma'am, you have to let me out of here. You said you would let me out. Let me out. I tried so hard. I looked up policies. I called who I could. I just tried to find any way out. And most of them, honestly, just said, this is how it goes. This is the protocol here. This is how it works.
Did you at any time request leave?
So I had, there were a few issues with that. One, I wasn't allowed to leave. When I was in Belgium, I wasn't allowed to leave the country. So because I wasn't vaccinated, I wasn't allowed freedom of movement, right? And then if I requested leave, there was all of these prerequisites that I had to follow, which I did. And I did use it when I could. But most of the time I was contained within the base because I wasn't vaccinated, definitely within the country, wasn't allowed to leave. And then it was interesting because I didn't have the COVID passport. If you remember that, it was a QR code, which in Europe, they were crazy about this. They would not let you go into a coffee shop if you didn't have this. They wouldn't let you go into an open park if you didn't have this QR code. So I remember trying to go to a Christmas market and they're like, do you have the COVID passport? I'm like, no. Yeah, so I could not move. My freedom of movement was very restrained. And it was a really tough time.
Did you see the policies being just the U.S.? So Belgium had their own policies, but were your strict quarantine policies the United States policies, or was it the Belgian policies?
So I do know, for example, in Korea and in Belgium, the U.S., we try to keep a good reputation. So I know that they were harsher on us because the U.S. military is trying to keep the reputation of we are not bringing COVID to your shores. Korea had a big fear of American soldiers because they thought that we were bringing COVID. So I know the U.S. military was being extra harsh on us because of that. But all of this was, I think it was like, okay, you have the country's regulations, which we had to follow, as well as the U.S. military. And then for me personally, unvaccinated as well. So I had all of these layers of limitations. And it was extremely limiting. I was not allowed to do anything. And most of the time too, as I talk about the great experience I had being a broadcaster, honestly, I would have loved if I could have actually finished out. I would have loved if I would have not been put in quarantine for all those months. I mean, months and months and months of good hours, an airman that was more than willing to work all those hours, and I wanted to be there. People liked what I did and what I provided on the show, and I was just not allowed to contribute in the service, which is why I joined. So I think the military was spending so much money, so much resource on these quarantine barracks and on all of the contact tracing. It was such a waste of our money and our time.
Wow. All right. Well, Briana, I'm really sorry. It's just absolutely unbelievable, your story. All right. So why did it end with that 140th day in quarantine? Were you fired at that point? And what date does that put you at?
So the 140 days, right? So that's over 10 times in quarantine, right? And it was after that amount of time, it was already in July. It was July 11th, 2022, that I got officially discharged. And I didn't know that I was going to be discharged until I found out July 4th that I was getting out July 11th. I had known once my first the initial denial was in March of 2022. I have to check my dates to make sure I'm accurate, but it was early 2022 that I found out. That was after 168 days of waiting. I was sent to Belgium. I was still going through the quarantines. I was talking with my master sergeant every day, like, hey, have you heard anything? Am I staying in? Right? So I'm working. I'm supposed to put on E5. I have my line number. I'm trying to do the best I can do, but every single day putting on that uniform, I don't know if the next day I'm just going to be out. It's a very strange place to be in when you know that you're contributing to something that is literally trying to fire you at the same time or trying to get rid of you. And it's demotivating for sure. So it was finally, I got the denial of my religious exemption. I got a response and they said, you're denied. Sent an appeal. And then it was the next month that they responded and it was denied. And at that point, I knew, all right, I'm getting out. After the denial, the second denial, they non-recommended me for promotion for the staff sergeant slot that I earned and I got. So that was obviously taking away of pay, taking away of opportunities, taking away of the position that I had earned. And then they gave me letters of reprimand as well, which is just things that go in your PIF and your paperwork, saying that I was disobeying a lawful order.
I'm so sorry. Was that their main reasoning?
Yeah. So everything on my paperwork says disobeying a lawful order, right? So it's the UCMJ Article 92. Which is interesting and ironic because in the UCMJ, there is also the requirement that we disobey unlawful orders. We are required to, actually. And if you looked at just the memo, you don't have to look at all the other things, the emergency, the Nuremberg Code. We could go into all that. But if you simply look at the memo that Secretary of Defense put out when he said, you are required to get an FDA-approved product, and then you see that the product was emergency authorized. Right there, that makes the order that they're telling me you have to get this emergency authorized product. I'm saying, no, that's not lawful. But they still called it a lawful order. And on my DD-214, it says I have a general discharge. So I lost the honorable. I don't have the GI Bill. And I have a misconduct serious offense as the coding for my discharge status.
Does that affect you in getting future jobs?
Definitely. Yeah. A general discharge has affected employment. It affects some federal employment. It affects GI Bill, which is the biggest hitter because I didn't get to finish law school. I joined the military and I really wanted to go to law school. And I still want to go to law school. I believe that we will win this and we will get our discharges upgraded. And I plan to go to law school and keep fighting for the Constitution. That's my plan. And it also hurts us with support services like veteran support organizations. American Legion, my local chapter right here, they won't let me join because I don't have an honorable status. So there's all kinds of inhibitions with the status that I have.
Have you ever had a conversation with them about this, and what was their reaction? Let's say the American Legion.
Yeah. So it's interesting because my local chapter says, oh, I'm sorry, you have to get your discharge upgraded before we can help you. But I talked to another person who's more federal. She works with like the American Legion federal team. And she's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened to you. Like, I'm going to talk to our lawyers. So there's different responses, and I think it's based on the person. It's hard to have federal distribute all of the information down to each chapter, I'm sure. So maybe American Legion will update their policy and say, hey, look, these people are allowed to come in. But just the fact that that barrier exists is true for a lot of organizations. It's not just for American Legion. So it exists now for American Legion. It exists with others. I mean, I remember one time I was trying to go on a cruise, and they had like a $250 like discount, and it said for honorable discharge veterans. And I was like, like simple, right? Like I can't complain about the cruise, but it's just like little things that as a veteran, right? That the 1% we serve. And I know that our nation cares about veterans, and they say, we want to take care of you. You know, mental health and suicide is a huge thing amongst veterans. And as I go to these briefings and I talk to these veteran support organizations, I'm like, hey, do you know what I went through? Do you know that I was put into isolation over and over and over? And if I didn't have the Lord, I would be considering suicide too. Like the mental health issues that rose from the COVID time was awful for our military members active and for our veterans now, especially after you're told, which really gets to me every time, you're told you're not honorable. You're told your service is disqualified according to the VA. That's why they won't give you the GI Bill. When I called the VA for the education benefits, just asking, she said, I'm sorry, but your service is disqualified. And when I joined the military, I was proud to put the Céspedes name, that's my last name, to put the Céspedes name on the U.S. uniform, to say, we've come from Cuba and Mexico, and now we have contributed to this country. We finally, you know? And then that uniform is taken away, and we're told our service is not honorable. It's just, it gets to my heart.
Yeah, it's sick.
Yeah.
Sick.
Yeah. And for the principle that defending the Constitution it's all for this mandate, which is now rescinded. Whether people believe that the vaccine is good or not, I don't mind. It's if you take it, it's fine. It's just the matter of, okay, look at the unlawful mandate that it was. It didn't fall in line with policies. And then now look at it now. It doesn't exist in our military, right? We don't have that mandate anymore, but I'm still suffering under it. There's thousands of us that are suffering under it still. That shouldn't be the case.
So what is the path forward? I'd like to talk a little bit about your involuntary veteran organization that you have started, but let's first talk about the Army letters that were sent to the involuntary veterans in the Army. They were not offering back there was no talk about military commandship, like getting your specific command back. There was no apology. There was no talk. They weren't they talking though about making the discharge then an honorable discharge, but still allowing you to come back into the Army. Like the papers would be changed a little bit if you come back.
Right. So that memo, the way I say it is it's the most unapologetic apology that exists. The DoD is trying to push things under the rug, and they're trying to do a few things. One, they're trying to make it look in front of the public eye like, hey, guys, we need you back. Like, come, recruitment issues. We all know that there's crazy recruitment issues, crazy retention issues in the military. We wonder why, based on all the things I just talked about in my own experience. Two, a lot of what they're trying to do is make it seem to the public eye like there is a solution. They're not offering any solution in that memo. There is nothing different. We have always had the ability to ask for our discharges to be upgraded. I did that before this memo came out. I mean, it's not new news. It's like, oh, all of a sudden, like, yay, our discharges can be upgraded. No, we have to go through a whole board appeal process. It's under a 2 to 3 year backlog before they're even going to start to look at applications. So this is not offering any solution whatsoever. And for them to say like, hey, you can come back in. Okay, we could do that before too. So it's not doing anything. And I think it's really trying to get to the public to make them feel like, oh, like you have an answer now, but it's not actually. And then I also think they are doing something with the voluntary. On the memo, it says, and we can put your status as a voluntary separation and upgrade your discharge. It says that. However, if we are correcting all the records of involuntary veterans to be voluntary, then it makes me look like, oh, she wasn't kicked out. She just got out voluntarily.
Yeah. That is called the COVID amnesty that they're trying to do. They're trying to wipe it. They're trying to cover their tracks, wipe it with Lysol, and make it seem like nothing happened at all. Something did happen, and those marks will not go away.
Yeah, and that's the same reason why they did non-judicial punishment versus the court-martialing when we were in, right? So one reason why all of our lawsuits that we have out there are being found moot, they're being dismissed, is because the mandate is rescinded now. And also because we didn't have the court-martialing, which is the due process that we were owed for this kind of thing. So they just did non-judicial, which is up to commander's discretion, and they can just kick us out. I wish, now that I know, I wish I would have been court-martialed, because then at least I could have some proceeding that has a legal set and precedent. And that's what the DOD has been avoiding this whole time, that legal precedence to where they can get caught red-handed, right? So
it'll be very interesting to see what happens with Mark Bashaw, who was court-martialed.
Yes. And there are a couple other cases that are still going on. And I'm praying that they can actually get somewhere rather than a settlement. We need something more than that. I know that there was a win with a settlement technically, but it's not really a win because it's just settling, and it's not really creating the precedent of the DOD was wrong here. That needs to be found. And that's really what we were doing with involuntary veterans. A group of us went out to DC. This was 2 weeks ago, roughly. And we were able to talk to a bunch of offices, more than 11 offices, through the Judiciary Committee. And we were able to speak to them and say, hey, we're looking for congressional investigations and regional hearings. We can start with regional hearings just to start the conversation, because our representatives and senators, they're aware of what is going on. We are being loud. We are knocking on their doors. We are talking to them constantly. And now what we need is that investigation. So there is introspection into what's happening. Like, hey, what is happening in the DOD? What happened in the DOD? And was there finding of illegal policies and illegal actions against those policies? So we know the IG, right? The DOD IG, he found, it's the Inspector General for the DOD. He found, and this was back in 2022, a large, and it says, quote, blatant denial of religious exemptions, which is not allowed, right? They have to independently look at every single exemption. But we saw that there were tons of programs that they had to, okay, if it says COVID vaccine, automatic denial, right? So there's all kinds of things there are to investigate. And that's what we need. We need a congressional investigation. That's what we're pushing for. And we're pushing for amendments as well. The NDAA has a couple amendments, such as the Americans Act, that hopefully this December will be voted on and passed, where they will automatically upgrade discharge statuses for all involuntary veterans. They will, if anyone wants to join, they'll clear records and make sure that they're good and not punished when they join back in the military. And then they're also going to do something really important, which is to make sure that the Secretary of Defense cannot put another COVID-type mandate out without congressional approval. And that's really important because a huge reason that I'm not going to join again, especially at this time, is because Secretary of Defense can literally do it again. There is nothing stopping him from doing this mandate again. There's been no legal finding. There's been nothing to say, hey, you're not allowed to do this. So that's why I really hope the amendment, like the Americans Act, could be something we start with, and we're pushing for more amendments as well.
You are doing just what we at Feds for Freedom are doing. We are seeking accountability, integrity, and reform in a broken bureaucracy.
There we go.
Yep. You're doing it. So I know we're short on time, but I have two more questions.
Yes.
When you were in quarantine, what were some of the phrases that you kept saying over and over to yourself to keep you going?
Well, I'll start with the negative one. One of the phrases I was saying as I was walking from wall to wall, like, this was ridiculous. I remember saying to myself, what has happened to us? Just keep saying that over and over. What has happened to us? And then on a positive note, another phrase that my dad told me before he passed away, actually last year, after I got kicked out, I got to spend 6 months with him by his bedside. But he was a huge, huge element to me staying strong. And he told me, he's like, look, maybe you're in the military for such a time as this. Just like Esther, right? For such a time as this. Maybe this is why you're here. Maybe it wasn't about getting the rank and becoming officer and going spec ops and the glory of all that. Maybe it was actually to be kicked out and to stand for the principle of why you joined in the first place. That was huge.
If there is one thing that the average American citizen can do to combat the corruption that we have talked about today, what would it be?
Well, I would say for sure, know the Constitution and continue to defend it. In whatever arena you're in your life, keep the Constitution close, because that is the document that keeps things clear to us. COVID, a lot of things got intermingled. There was a lot of fear, but we can be free from fear and focus on the principles of what we stand for, which are based in the Word of God. So I have to say, know Jesus and know the Constitution. So those two things.
Thank you so much for this conversation, Briana. We really enjoyed having you.
Thank you so much. I've really loved it too.